Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Fifth Walk. Of all the places I have lived, and I have lived in some charming ones, none has made me so truly happy, nor left me such tender regrets as St. Peter's Island in the middle of Lake Bienne. This small island, which is called Hillock Island in Neuchâtel, is quite unknown, even in Switzerland. As far as I know, no traveler mentions it. However, it is very pleasant and singularly placed for the happiness of a man who likes to cut himself off. For although I am perhaps the only one in the world whose destiny has imposed this on him as a law, I cannot believe myself to be the only one who has so natural a taste, even though I have not found it in anyone else thus far. The banks of Lake Bienne are wilder and more romantic than those of Lake Geneva, because the rocks and woods border the water more closely, but they are not less cheerful. If the fields and vineyards are less cultivated, and if there are fewer towns and houses, there is also more natural greenery, more meadows, grove-shaded retreats, more frequent contrast, and more variety in the terrain. As there are no large thoroughfares suitable for coaches on these happy shores, the countryside is seldom frequented by travelers, but it is interesting for solitary contemplators who like to delight in the charms of nature at leisure and collect their thoughts in a silence troubled by no noise other than the cry of eagles, the intermittent chirping of a few birds, and the rushing of torrents as they fall from the mountain. This beautiful basin, almost circular in form, has two small islands in its center, one inhabited and cultivated, almost half a league around, the other smaller, uninhabited and uncultivated, and which will ultimately be destroyed because earth is constantly taken away from it to repair the destruction waves and storms make to the large one. Thus, it is that the substance of the weak is always used for the advantage of the powerful. On the island there is only a single house, but a large, pleasant, and comfortable one, which, like the island, belongs to Bern Hospital, and in which a tax collector lives with his family and servants. He maintains a large farmyard, a pigeon house, and fish ponds. Despite its smallness, the island is so varied in its terrain and vistas that it offers all kinds of landscapes and permits all kinds of cultivation. You can find fields, vineyards, woods, orchards, and rich pastures shaded by thickets and bordered by every species of shrubbery, whose freshness is preserved by the adjacent water. A high terrace, planted with 2 rows of trees, runs the length of the island, and in the middle of this terrace a pretty reception hall has been built where the inhabitants of the neighboring banks gather and come to dance on Sundays during harvests. This is the island on which I sought refuge after the stoning at Mortier. I found the sojourn on it so charming, I led a life there so suitable to my temper, that, resolved to end my days there, I had no worry other than their not letting me execute this project, which did not fit in with the one of transporting me to England, a project whose first effects I was already feeling. Because of the forebodings that troubled me, I wanted them to make this refuge a perpetual prison for me, to confine me to it for life, and removing every possibility and hope of getting off it, to forbid me any kind of communication with the mainland, so that, being unaware of all that went on in the world, I might forget its existence, and that it might also forget mine. They let me spend scarcely 2 months on this island, but I would have spent 2 years there, 2 centuries, and the whole of eternity without being bored for a moment, even though, besides my helpmate, I had no companionship there other than that of the tax collector, his wife, and his servants, who in truth were all very worthy people, but nothing more. But that was precisely what I needed. I consider these 2 months the happiest time of my life, so happy that it would have contented me for my whole existence without the desire for another state arising for a single instant in my soul. Now, what was this happiness, and in what did its enjoyment consist? From the description of the life I led there, I will let all the men of this century guess at it. The precious far niente was the first and the principal enjoyment I wanted to savor in all its sweetness, and all I did during my sojourn was in effect only the delicious and necessary pursuit of a man who has devoted himself to idleness. The hope that they would ask for nothing better than to leave me in this isolated spot where I had ensnared myself on my own, which it was impossible for me to leave without help and surely without being noticed, and where I could have communication or correspondence only by the assistance of the people who surrounded me. This hope, I say, led me to the hope I would end my days there more peacefully than I had spent them until then. And the idea that I would have time to adapt myself to it in complete leisure caused me to begin by not adapting at all. Transported there abruptly, alone, and destitute, I had my housekeeper, my books, and my few furnishings brought over, one after the other, and I had the pleasure of unpacking nothing, leaving my boxes and my trunks as they had arrived, and living in the abode in which I counted on finishing my days, as in an inn I would have to leave on the following day. All things, such as they were, went along so well that to want to arrange them better would have been to spoil something. Above all, one of my greatest delights was to leave my books well packed up, and to have no writing table. When wretched letters forced me to take up a pen to reply, I grudgingly borrowed the tax collector's writing table, and then hastened to return it, in the vain hope of not needing to borrow it again. Instead of depressing papers and heaps of old books, I filled my room with flowers and dried plants, for I was then in my first botanical fervour, for which Dr. d'Avernois had given me an inclination, and which soon became a passion. Wanting no more toilsome work, I needed something amusing which would please me and require only as much trouble as a lazy man likes to take. I set about doing the flora Petrinsularis, and describing all the plants of the island without omitting a single one, in sufficient detail to occupy myself for the rest of my days. It is said that a German did a book about a lemon peel. I would have done one about each stalk of hay of the meadows, each moss of the woods, each lichen and carpets the rocks. In short, I did not want to leave a blade of grass or a plant particle which was not amply described. As a result of this fine project, every morning after breakfast, which we all had together, I would go off, a magnifying glass in my hand and my Systema Naturae under my arm, to visit a district of the island, which I had divided into small squares for this purpose, with the intention of covering them one after the other in each season. Nothing is more singular than the raptures and ecstasies I felt with each observation I made on plant structure and organization, as well as on the role of the sexual parts in sporulation, which was then a completely new system for me. I was enchanted to discover generic features of which I previously had not the slightest idea, and to verify them on common species, while waiting for rarer ones to offer themselves to me. The forking of the two long stamens of the self-heel, the spring of those, the nettle, and the pellitory, the explosion of the fruit of the balsam, and the pod of the boxwood, 8,000 little games of sporulation, which I observed for the first time, filled me with joy, and I went around asking whether one had seen the horns of the self-heel plant, like La Fontaine asking whether one had read Habakkuk. At the end of 2 or 3 hours, I would come back laden with an ample harvest, a stock with which to amuse myself after lunch in the lodging in case of rain. I would use the rest of the morning to go with the tax collector, his wife, and Teresa to visit their workers and their crops, quite often joining my hand with theirs in work, and often the residents of Bern, who came to see me, found me perched in large trees, girded with a sack, that I would fill with fruits and then lower to the ground with a rope. My morning exercise, and the good temper which is inseparable from it, made the pause for lunch very enjoyable. But when it took too long and good weather beckoned, I could not wait so long. While they were still at the table, I would slip away and go throw myself along into a boat, and I rowed to the middle of the lake, when the water was calm, and there, stretching myself out, full length in the boat, my eyes turned to heaven, I let myself slowly drift back and forth with the water, sometimes for several hours, plunged in 1,000 confused but delightful reveries, which, even without having any well-determined or constant object, were, in my opinion, 100 times preferable to the sweetest things I had found in what are called the pleasures of life. Often warned by the setting of the sun that it was the hour of retreat, I would find myself so far from the island that I was forced to work with all my might to get back before nightfall. Other times, instead of heading out to open water, I took pleasure in gliding along the verdant banks of the island, where the limpid waters and fresh shadows often induced me to bathe. But one of my most frequent sailings was from the large to the small island. There I would debark and spend the afternoon sometimes in very limited promenades through great round-leaved sallow, alder buckthorn, willow-weed, shrubs of every sort, and sometimes setting myself on the summit of a sandy knoll covered with grass, common thyme, flowers, even coxcomb and clover that had most likely been sown there some time ago, and were very suitable for housing rabbits, which could multiply in peace there without fearing anything and without doing any harm. I passed this idea on to the tax collector, who had male and female rabbits brought from Nocatl, and in great pomp his wife, one of his sisters, Teresa, and I went to settle them on the small island, where they began to breed before my departure, and where they will undoubtedly have thrived, if they have been able to withstand the rigor of the winters. The founding of this little colony was a festival. The pilot of the Argonauts was no prouder than I, leading the company and the rabbits in triumph from the large island to the small. And I noted with pride that the tax collector's wife, who dreaded water excessively, and always felt uncomfortable upon it, embarked under my leadership with confidence, and showed no fear during the crossing. When the lake was too rough for boating, I would spend my afternoon wandering over the island, searching right and left for plants, sometimes sitting down in the most cheerful and solitary nooks to dream at my ease, and sometimes on terraces and knolls to let my eyes wander over the superb and breathtaking view of the lake and its shores, crowned on one side by the nearby mountains, and on the other spread out onto rich and fertile plains, over which my sight extended all the way up to the more distant bluish mountains which blocked it. When evening approached, I would come down from the heights of the island and gladly go sit in some hidden nook along the beach at the edge of the lake. There the noise of the waves and the tossing of the water, captivating my senses and chasing all other disturbance from my soul, plunged it into a delightful reverie, in which night would often surprise me without my having noticed it. The ebb and flow of this water, and its noise, continual, but magnified at intervals, striking my ears and eyes without respite, took the place of the internal movements which reverie extinguished within me, and was enough to make me feel my existence with pleasure, and without taking the trouble to think. From time to time, some weak and short reflection about the instability of things in this world arose, an image brought on by the surface of the water. But soon these weak impressions were erased by the uniformity of the continual movement which lulled me, and which, without any active assistance from my soul, held me so fast that, called by the hour and agreed upon signal, I could not tear myself away without effort. After supper, when the evening was fine, we would all go for a little walk together on the terrace to breathe in the air and the freshness of the lake. We would relax in the pavilion, laugh, chat, sing some old song, which was easily as good as the modern rigmarole, and finally go to bed content with our day, desiring only a similar one the next day. Leaving aside unexpected and importunate visits, this is the way I spent my time on this island during my sojourn there. Tell me now, what is so alluring about it as to arouse such intense, tender, and lasting regrets in my heart that at the end of 15 years it is impossible for me to think of that cherished abode without each time feeling myself carried away again by waves of desire. In the vicissitudes of a long life, I have noticed that the periods of sweetest enjoyment and most intense pleasures are nevertheless not those whose recollection most attracts and touches me. Those short moments of delirium and passion, however intense they might be, are, even with their intensity, still only scattered points along the path of life. They are too rare and too rapid to constitute a state of being, and the happiness for which my heart longs is in no way made up of fleeting instants, but rather a simple and permanent state, which has nothing intense in itself, but whose duration increases its charm to the point that I finally find supreme felicity in it. Everything is in continual flux on earth, nothing on it returns a constant and static form, and our affections, which are attached to external things, necessarily pass away and change as they do. Always ahead of or behind us, they recall the past which is no longer, or foretell the future which often is in no way to be. There is nothing solid there to which the heart might attach itself. Thus, here below, we have hardly anything but transitory pleasure. As for happiness, which lasts, I doubt that it is known here. In our most intense enjoyments, there is hardly an instant when the heart can truly say to us, I would like this instant to last forever. And how can we call happiness a fleeting state which leaves our hearts still worried and empty, which makes us long for something beforehand, or desire something else afterward? But if there is a state in which the soul finds a solid enough base to rest itself on entirely, and to gather its whole being into without needing to recall the past, or encroach upon the future, in which time is nothing for it, in which the present lasts forever, without, however, making its duration noticed, and without any trace of time's passage, without any other sentiment of deprivation or of enjoyment, pleasure or pain, desire or fear, except that of our existence, and having this sentiment alone fill it completely. As long as this state lasts, he who finds himself in it can call himself happy, not with an imperfect, poor, and relative happiness, such as one finds in the pleasures of life, but with a sufficient, perfect, and full happiness, which leaves the soul no emptiness it might feel and need to fill. Such is the state in which I often found myself during my solitary reveries on St. Peter's Island, either lying in my boat as I let it drift with the water, or seated on the banks of the tossing lake, or elsewhere at the edge of a beautiful river, or of a brook murmuring over pebbles. What do we enjoy in such a situation? Nothing external to ourselves, nothing if not ourselves and our own existence. As long as this state lasts, we are sufficient unto ourselves, like God. The sentiment of existence, stripped of any other emotion, is in itself a precious sentiment of contentment and of peace, which alone would suffice to make this existence dear and sweet to anyone able to spurn all the sensual and earthly impressions which incessantly come to distract us from it and to trouble its sweetness here below. But most men, agitated by continual passions, are little acquainted with the state, and, having tasted it only imperfectly for a few moments, preserve only an obscure and confused idea of it, which does not let them feel its charm. It would not even be good in the present structure of things that, avid for these sweet ecstasies, they should become disgusted with the active life their ever recurring needs prescribe to them as a duty. But an unfortunate person who has been cut off from human society, and who can no longer do anything here below useful and good for another or for himself, can find compensations for all the human felicities in this state, compensations which fortune and men could not take away from him. It is true that these compensations cannot be felt by all souls, nor in all situations. The heart must be at peace, and no passion come to disturb its calm. The one who experiences them must be favorable to them, as must be the conjunction of the surrounding objects. What is needed is neither absolute rest nor too much agitation, but a uniform and moderated movement, having neither jolts nor lapses. Without movement, life is only lethargy. If the movement is irregular or too strong, one is awakened. By reminding us of the surrounding objects, it destroys the charm of the reverie and tears us away from within ourselves, bringing us instantly back under the yoke of fortune and men, and returning us to an awareness of our misfortunes. An absolute silence leads to sadness. It offers an image of death. Then the assistance of a cheerful imagination is necessary, and comes naturally enough to those whom heaven has favored. Movement which does not come from outside then occurs inside us. One rests less, it is true, but also more pleasurably. When light and sweet ideas only skim the surface of the soul, so to speak, without disturbing its depths. Only enough ideas are needed to remember our own self while forgetting all our troubles. This kind of reverie can be enjoyed wherever we can be quiet, and I have often thought that in the Bastille, even in a dungeon, where no object would strike my sight, I would still have been able to dream pleasurably. But admittedly, that was done better and more pleasurably on a fertile and solitary island, naturally closed off and separated from the rest of the world, where nothing but cheerful images came to me, where nothing recalled depressing memories to me, where the society of the small number of inhabitants was gentle and sweet, without being so interesting as to occupy me continuously, where I could, in short, give myself up all day long to the preoccupations of my liking to luxurious idleness, without hindrance and care. It was undoubtedly a perfect occasion for a dreamer who, knowing how to nourish himself with pleasurable fancies in the middle of the most unpleasant objects, could satiate himself with them at his ease by making everything which really struck his senses come together in them. Upon emerging from a long and sweet reverie, upon seeing myself surrounded by greenery, flowers, and birds, and letting my eyes wander in the distance on the romantic shores which bordered a vast stretch of crystal clear water, I assimilated all these lovely objects to my fictions, and finally finding myself brought back by degrees to myself and to what surrounded me, I could not mark out the point separating the fictions from the realities. It was this thorough conjunction of everything which made the absorbed and solitary life I led during this beautiful sojourn so dear to me. If it could only occur again, if I could only go end my days on this beloved island without ever coming off it, for ever seeing there any inhabitant of the continent to remind me of all the different calamities they have taken pleasure in heaping on me for so many years. They would soon be forever forgotten. Undoubtedly, they would not likewise forget me. But what would that matter to me, provided they had no way to come there to disturb my rest? Delivered from all the earthly passions the tumult of social life engenders, my soul would frequently soar up above this atmosphere and commune in advance with the celestial intelligences whose number it hopes to augment in a short while. I know men will be careful not to give me back such a sweet refuge when they did not want to leave me there, but at least they will not prevent me from transporting myself there every day on the wings of my imagination, and from enjoying for a few hours the same pleasure as if I were still living there. The sweetest thing I would do would be to dream there at my ease. In dreaming that I am there, do I not do the same thing? I do even more. To the allure of an abstract and monotonous reverie, I join charming images which make it more intense. In my ecstasies, their objects often eluded my senses. Now, the deeper my reverie is, the more intensely it depicts them to me. I am often more in the midst of them, and even more pleasantly so than when I was really there. The misfortune is that, to the extent that my imagination cools, this comes with more labor, and does not last as long. Alas! It is when we begin to leave our skin that it hinders us the most.